Hey guys, today, I bring you a surprising and moving story that will shake your beliefs and question everything you've ever heard about Jesus. Get ready for a story of overcoming and spiritual transformation like never before. Our protagonist, Alaric Thornwood, had a near-death experience that led him to a direct encounter with Jesus. What he discovered will completely change his outlook on life, death, and religions. So, before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our incredible content. Let's unveil this shocking revelation together. Hello, my name is Alaric Thornwood. First of all, I want to make it clear that I have never been a person very attached to spirituality or religion. I was actually quite skeptical about these things. My life has always revolved around work and business. I own, or rather owned, a small design firm in Charleston, South Carolina. My days were filled with endless meetings, tight deadlines, and the constant pressure of keeping my business running. I had a family, my wife Julianne and our 2 children, Mason and Elena, but to be honest, they often took a back seat. I always justified myself by saying that I was working hard to give them a better future, but the truth is that I was completely immersed in my work. I've never been one to take vacations. There was always an excuse, an important project, a client that couldn't wait, a business opportunity that couldn't be missed. Year after year, family vacation promises were made and broken. I saw the disappointment in my children's eyes, the frustration on my wife's face, but I kept moving forward, convinced that I was doing what was best for all of us. My routine was predictable: waking up early, drinking coffee quickly while checking emails, spending the day at the office solving problems and serving clients, returning home late at night, often after the kids were asleep. On the weekends, I usually worked from home, trying to convince myself that being physically present was enough, even though my mind was completely focused on work. I considered myself a practical and rational man. There was no room in my life for spiritual questions or deeper reflections on the meaning of life. My objective was clear: to build a successful company, guarantee financial stability for my family, and perhaps one day, when everything was resolved, I would be able to relax and enjoy life. Little did I know that all of this was about to change. In the summer of 2015, after much insistence from my wife, I finally agreed to take a family vacation. We decided to go to Isle of Palms, one of the most beautiful islands near Charleston. The idea was simple: spend a week relaxing on the beach, away from the stress of work and daily routine. I had no idea that this trip would be the catalyst for an experience that would completely change my life, my worldview, and my understanding of what really matters. What began as a simple family vacation turned into a spiritual journey that led me to question everything I believed I knew about life, death, and the purpose of our existence. This is the story of my near-death experience, an event that not only brought me back from the brink of life and death, but also completely transformed the way I view and experience life. It's a story about discovery, transformation, and most of all, about learning the true meaning of love and human connection. It was July 2015 when we finally embarked on our long-awaited family vacation. I clearly remember the day we arrived at Isle of Palms. The sun was shining brightly, and the salty sea air invaded our nostrils as soon as we got out of the car. The children, Mason and Elena, immediately ran onto the sand, their laughter echoing across the nearly empty beach. Julianne smiled at me, a smile that mixed relief and expectation. She had fought so hard for this vacation, and I could see in her eyes the hope that this time together could reconnect us as a family. I tried to smile back, but the truth was that I was already feeling the anxiety rising inside me. My phone vibrated in my pocket, an email from an important client, and I had to fight the urge to check it immediately. We settled into the beach house we had rented. It was a cozy place, with a sea view and a balcony where we could sit and enjoy the sunset. The children were excited, running from one room to another, deciding who would get which room. Julianne began unpacking, humming softly, clearly happy that we were there. I, on the other hand, felt a restlessness that I couldn't explain. I was tired, more than I imagined. Years of intense work, sleepless nights, and constant stress had taken their toll, although I wasn't ready to admit it yet. I tried to stay in the moment, helping organize our things and listening to the kids' excited plans for the week. That first night, we all sat together on the porch for dinner. The sound of waves crashing on the beach formed a relaxing melody, and the sky was painted with shades of orange and pink as the sun sank below the horizon. It should have been a perfect moment, the start of a week of reconnection and relaxation, but I couldn't completely switch off. My mind wandered to the unfinished projects, the meetings I would have upon return, the decisions I needed to make. Julianne must have noticed my distraction. She placed her hand over mine and said softly, "Alaric, we're here now. Try to relax." I nodded, forcing a smile, and tried my best to join in the kids' lively conversation about what we were going to do the next day. After the kids went to bed, Julianne and I hung out on the porch a little longer. She talked about her plans for the week, walks on the beach, picnics, maybe a visit to the local aquarium. I listened, trying to get excited, but a strange feeling began to form in the pit of my stomach. It was as if something was out of place, although I couldn't explain what. I went to bed that night with a mix of emotions. Part of me was genuinely happy to be there with my family, away from the pressures of everyday life. But another part, a bigger part than I'd like to admit, was already counting down the days until I could get back to the familiar work routine. Little did I know that the events of the next day would change everything, and that this restlessness I felt was just the prelude to something much bigger that was about to happen. The second day of our vacation started like any other. I woke up early as usual and decided to go for a walk on the beach before the rest of the family woke up. The sun had barely risen and the beach was practically deserted. I walked along the shore, feeling the cool sand beneath my feet and listening to the gentle lapping of the waves. It was during this walk that I felt it for the first time, a sharp pain in my chest as if someone was squeezing my heart. At first, I didn't pay much attention. After all, it wasn't uncommon for me to experience some physical discomfort due to stress. I stopped for a moment, took a deep breath and continued walking, waiting for the pain to go away. But it didn't happen. In fact, with every step I took, the pain seemed to intensify. I broke out in a cold sweat, despite the cool morning breeze. My breathing became more difficult, as if my lungs were refusing to function properly. A feeling of dread began to wash over me. I decided to go back to the beach house. Every step was an effort, and the distance I had covered so easily minutes before now seemed endless. When I finally arrived, Julianne was in the kitchen preparing breakfast. She looked at me and immediately knew something was wrong. "Alaric, are you okay? You look pale," she said, concern evident in her voice. I tried to minimize the situation. "I think I just need to get some rest," I replied, forcing a smile that must have looked more like a grimace. Julianne was not convinced. She sat me down and brought me a glass of water. The children entered the kitchen at that moment, excited for another day at the beach, but they soon realized that something wasn't right. The pain in my chest was becoming unbearable. Every breath was a struggle. The world around me began to become hazy, my family's voices sounding distant and muffled. I knew something was very wrong. "Julianne," I managed to say between labored breaths, "I think I need to go to the hospital." The panic in her eyes reflected my own fear. She quickly organized the children, grabbed the car keys and helped me up. The short walk to the car seemed to take forever. On the way to the hospital, my condition rapidly worsened. The pain was overwhelming, and I began to lose consciousness. The familiar landscapes of Charleston blurred past the car window. I could hear Julianne talking to me, begging me to stay awake, but her voice seemed to come from far away. We arrived at the hospital, and from then on, everything became a confusing whirlwind. I vaguely remember being placed on a gurney, urgent voices all around me, bright lights flashing over my head as I was rushed to the emergency room. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was a doctor's face leaning over me, his eyes serious as he said something I couldn't understand. Then darkness enveloped me, and I had the terrible sensation that I was falling into an endless abyss. It was at this moment, on the edge between life and death, that my experience truly began. an experience that would forever change my understanding of life, death, and everything in between. What happened next is something I struggled to understand and explain in the months and years that followed. It is an experience that defies logic and reason, something that cannot easily be put into words. But I'll try to describe it as best I can. The first thing I noticed was the absence of pain. The agony I felt in my chest just disappeared. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from me. In its place, I felt an indescribable lightness, as if I were floating. I opened my eyes, or at least I thought I had, and found myself in a place that wasn't exactly a place. It was like I was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. All around me was a light. It was not a light like any other I had ever seen. It was bright but not dazzling, warm but not uncomfortable. It was as if the light itself was alive, pulsing with an energy that I could feel in every fiber of my being. It was then that I realized I could see my own body lying on the hospital gurney. It was a surreal sight, as if I were watching a scene from a movie. I saw the doctors and nurses working frantically around me. I heard the muffled sound of machines beeping. I saw Julianne's anguished face on the other side of a glass window. But the strangest thing of all was that I didn't feel afraid. On the contrary, I felt a deep peace, a sense that everything was exactly as it should be. It was as if, for the first time in my life, I was completely in harmony with the universe. It was at that moment that I saw him. A man, although man seems an inadequate word to describe him, appeared before me. He had short brown hair and a neatly trimmed beard, and was wearing a white robe that seemed to shine with a light of its own. But what impressed me most were his eyes. They were eyes that seemed to contain all the wisdom and love in the universe. Immediately I knew who he was. I didn't need any introductions or explanations. It was Jesus, but not the Jesus I had seen in paintings or statues in churches. This Jesus was real, alive. And he emanated such pure and unconditional love that I felt completely enveloped by him. Jesus reached out his hand to me, and when I touched it, I felt a wave of energy course through my entire being. It was as if every cell in my body, or whatever I was at that moment, was being filled with light and love. He didn't speak, at least not in words, but I could understand everything he wanted to tell me. It was a form of communication that went beyond words, a direct exchange of thoughts and emotions. Jesus led me through what seemed like a tunnel of light. The walls of the tunnel glowed with colors I had never seen before, colors I don't even know exist in our physical world. As I walked through that tunnel of light with Jesus, I felt like I was traveling through the very fabric of the universe. Time seemed to not exist there. It could have been a second or an eternity. I couldn't tell. At the end of the tunnel, we found ourselves in a place that I can only describe as a vast field of light. It was as if we were in the center of a star, but without the heat or the blinding brightness. The light was soft, welcoming, almost tangible. And in that light, I could see other presences, not exactly people, but beings of light, who seemed to share a deep connection with me. It was then that Jesus began to communicate with me in a more direct way. They were not spoken words, but thoughts and feelings that flowed directly into my consciousness. The first thing I understood was that he was nothing like what I had imagined or what I was taught in the churches I attended sporadically throughout my life. There was no judgment in his eyes, no condemnation for my failures or mistakes. On the contrary, what I felt emanating from him was pure and unconditional love, a total acceptance of who I was, with all my imperfections. Driven by this acceptance, I felt an overwhelming need to confess my mistakes, to expose all the parts of myself that I had always tried to hide or deny. One memory in particular came flooding back, a lie I had told my parents when I was a teenager. It was something that always weighed on my conscience, even after so many years. I expected some kind of reprimand, but what I received was something completely different. Jesus looked at me with deep understanding and conveyed a thought that will forever be engraved in my soul. The important thing is not the mistake you made, but the sincere desire to be better. At that moment, I felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. All the guilt, all the regrets I carried seemed to dissolve into the light that surrounded us. Jesus then showed me a vision of my future. I saw myself, older, with gray hair, sitting on a porch. All around me, children were playing and laughing. My grandchildren, I knew somehow. The Alaric in this vision radiated a peace and joy that I had never experienced in my life. I understood then that there was still a lot for me to live and learn, that my journey on earth was far from over. But I also understood that I needed to change, that the life I was leading was not the life I was supposed to live. Jesus showed me how my obsession with work and material success was taking me away from what really mattered: my family, my relationships, the opportunity to make a difference in the lives of those around me. I saw flashbacks of my life, times when I had chosen work over being there for my family, times when I had ignored my children's emotional needs because I was too busy with important things. Each scene was like a stab in my heart, but there was no condemnation in them, just a deep understanding of what I needed to change. Then Jesus showed me possibilities, versions of myself that I could be if I chose to live with more love, more compassion, more presence. I saw myself helping others, spending quality time with my family, living a life of purpose and meaning. All this happened in an instant and in an eternity. When I finally came to myself, Jesus looked me in the eyes, and I understood that it was time to return. Part of me wanted to stay, remain in that infinite peace and love. But I knew I had a job to do, a life to live in a different way. Jesus held my hand one last time, and in that touch, I felt all the love in the universe flowing through me. Then, gently, he guided me back. The next thing I remember is opening my eyes in the hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines and worried faces. The pain was gone, but I knew something deep inside me had changed. I was no longer the same Alaric who had entered that hospital. And so began my journey back to life, a life that would be very different from the one I had left behind. Opening my eyes in that hospital bed was like being born again. The fluorescent overhead light, which would normally be irritating, now seemed almost sacred to me. Every breath was a miracle, every beat of my heart a blessing. Julianne was at my side, holding my hand. When our eyes met, I saw tears streaming down his face, tears of relief, of love, of fear overcome. I wanted to say so many things to her in that moment. I wanted to tell her about the incredible journey I had experienced, but all I could do was squeeze her hand and whisper a husky, "I love you." The doctors were surprised by my quick recovery. They explained to me that I had suffered a severe cardiac arrest caused by a small aneurysm that had not been detected before. The chances of survival were slim, they said, using words like miracle and inexplicable. But I knew there was nothing inexplicable. I knew exactly what had happened, even if I couldn't explain it in terms that made sense to medical science. The following days were a whirlwind of tests, doctor visits, and conversations with my family. Mason and Elena came to see me, their little faces a mix of fear and relief. I hugged them with an intensity that must have surprised them, promising myself that I would never take them for granted again. As I recovered physically, my mind was in constant activity, processing everything I had experienced. How do I tell others about my encounter with Jesus? How can I explain the profound transformation I felt within myself? I knew that many would not believe it, that some might even think I was delusional due to the traumatic experience. But for me, the experience was more real than anything I had ever experienced. Every detail was vivid in my mind: the light, the unconditional love, the lessons learned. I knew I couldn't just go back to my old life as if nothing had happened. During my recovery in the hospital, I started to make small changes. I asked Julianne to bring my laptop, not to work, but to start reorganizing my life. I sent emails delegating responsibilities within the company, canceled appointments that weren't essential, and started planning more time with my family. When I was finally discharged a week later, I was a different man, not just physically, thinner, paler, more fragile, but spiritually. There was a peace within me that I had never experienced before, a certainty of purpose that went beyond making money or building a successful company. We returned home, not to the beach house where our vacation had been so abruptly cut short, but to our home in Charleston. As I walked through the door, I looked at each room with new eyes. Every object, every piece of furniture seemed to tell a story. The story of a man who had lived with the wrong priorities for so long. That night I sat with Julianne and the kids and told them about my experience. I didn't go into all the details, but I shared enough for them to understand the profound change that had occurred in me. I talked about the love I had felt, about the lessons I had learned, about my desire to live a different life from then on. Julianne listened with tears in her eyes, holding my hand the entire time. The children were quiet, taking it all in with a seriousness that surprised me. When I finished speaking, there was a moment of silence. Then Elena, my 10-year-old daughter, said something that moved me deeply. "Daddy, I'm glad you're back to us. Not just from the hospital, but you're really back." At that moment, I knew the path ahead of me would not be easy. Changing lifelong habits, reorienting priorities, learning to live in a completely new way, all of this would be a challenge. But I also knew I had been given a second chance, an opportunity to do things differently, and I was determined not to waste it. In the months following my near-death experience, my life underwent a radical transformation. The changes I started to implement weren't easy. Old habits are hard to break, and I had a lot of deeply ingrained habits that needed to be challenged. The first big change was at work. I have always defined myself by my professional success, measuring my worth by the size of my company and the money I earned. Now, it all seemed so insignificant. It wasn't that I had completely lost interest in business, but my perspective had changed drastically. I started reducing my workload, delegating more responsibilities to my team. It was a difficult process. I was a micromanager by nature, and relying on others to make important decisions was not something I was used to doing. But every time I felt the temptation to go back to my old ways, I remembered the vision I saw during my experience. The older Alaric, at peace, surrounded by his family. This image gave me strength to continue. At home, the changes were equally profound. I started spending a lot more time with Julianne and the kids. At first, it was almost uncomfortable. I didn't know how to just be a husband and father anymore without having work as an excuse for my emotional absence. I had to relearn how to talk to my wife about something other than business and finances. I had to find out who my children were, what they liked, what worried them. One of the hardest things was learning to be present. Even when I was physically at home, my mind would often wander to work, to future projects, to problems to be solved. Now I consciously strive to be fully present in each moment. When I played with Mason, I tried to actually engage in the game instead of just feigning interest while my mind was elsewhere. When Elena told me about her day at school, I listened intently, asking questions and really caring about her answers. Another significant change was my approach to spirituality. Before my experience, I was essentially a practical agnostic. I didn't deny the existence of God, but I didn't think much about it either. Now I had a deep spiritual connection that couldn't be ignored. I started exploring different spiritual practices, meditation, prayer, reading sacred texts from various traditions. I didn't align myself with any specific religion, but I was looking for ways to nurture and express this new dimension of my life. Not everyone understood or easily accepted these changes. Some coworkers thought I had lost focus or was having some kind of midlife crisis. Some friends moved away, uncomfortable with my new interest in spiritual matters. Even some family members expressed concern, fearing that I had been radicalized by my near-death experience. But for every person who didn't understand, there was another who seemed inspired by my transformation. I started receiving messages from people, some acquaintances, others complete strangers who had heard about my story, asking about my experience, seeking guidance, or simply wanting to share their own stories of transformation. One of the biggest challenges was learning to talk about my experience in a way that made sense to others. How do you explain something so deeply personal and transcendent? How can I convey the intensity of the love I felt, the clarity of the lessons I learned? I often felt that my words were inadequate, that they failed to capture the true essence of what I had experienced. But despite the challenges, I knew I was on the right path. Every time I saw Julianne smile when I got home in time for dinner, every time I heard the children's genuine laughter as we played together, every time I felt that deep peace during my moments of reflection, I knew that the changes what I was doing were worth it. It wasn't an easy journey, and there were days when I struggled, days when the pull of old habits was strong. But then I would remember the look in Jesus' eyes, the unconditional love I had felt, and I would find the strength to continue. I was learning, day by day, to live life in a new way, with more love, more presence, more purpose. And although the path wasn't always smooth, I knew it was the right path for me. As the months turned into years, the changes I began implementing shortly after my near-death experience became an integral part of my life. What started as a conscious effort to live differently gradually became my new normal. One of the most significant changes was the way I started to view the purpose of my life. Before, my focus was almost exclusively on achieving professional and financial success. Now, I found myself constantly looking for ways to make a difference in the lives of others. I started getting involved in volunteer work in the community. Julianne and I started spending Saturdays at a local shelter, helping serve meals and talking to people. At first, I felt uncomfortable and out of my element. I was used to dealing with business people and customers, not homeless people. But slowly, I began to see each person there as an individual with their own story, their own dreams and struggles. I learned more about compassion and humility on those Saturdays than in all my years in the corporate world. At home, my relationship with Julianne and the kids blossomed in ways I never could have imagined. Julianne and I rediscovered each other, learning to communicate on a deeper level. Our conversations were no longer dominated by discussions about work or finances. Instead, we talked about our feelings, our fears, our dreams. We shared ideas about spirituality and the meaning of life. It was as if we were falling in love again, but in a more mature and deeper way. With children, each day brought new discoveries. I was constantly amazed at the wisdom that Mason and Elena demonstrated. I began to see them not just as my children, but as young souls with their own unique journeys. I came to value their perspectives even when they differed from mine. Our dinner table conversations became precious moments of connection and mutual growth. At work, my new approach has brought unexpected changes. As I delegated more responsibilities and trusted my team more, I saw my employees grow and develop in surprising ways. The atmosphere in the office changed. People seemed happier, more motivated. Productivity increased, not because I was pressuring everyone to work harder, but because people felt valued and empowered. I began implementing policies that prioritized employee well-being. Flexible hours, remote workdays, corporate volunteer programs, all of these initiatives grew out of my new understanding that success in business and caring for people were not mutually exclusive. My spiritual quest also continued to evolve. Although my experience has been Jesus-centered, I have not felt compelled to align myself with any specific religion. Instead, I found value in several spiritual traditions: meditation, yoga, reading sacred texts from different cultures. All of these practices have become part of my daily routine. I learned to see the universal wisdom behind different beliefs and practices. One of the most rewarding things was seeing how my transformation affected those around me. Friends and colleagues started reaching out to me to talk about deeper issues in life. Some were inspired to make their own changes, reevaluating their priorities and seeking a greater work-life balance. Of course, not everything was easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if I was doing the right thing. The corporate world can be unforgiving, and there were those who saw my new approach as a weakness. I lost some deals and some contacts because I was no longer willing to do whatever it took to close a deal. But each time I faced a challenge, each time doubt threatened to overwhelm me, I remembered my experience. I remembered the unconditional love I had felt, the deep peace I had experienced. and that gave me the strength to continue on the path I had chosen. As the years passed, I began to see the fruits of the changes I had made. My relationship with Julianne was stronger than ever. My children were growing up as confident and compassionate individuals. My company, while perhaps not as big or profitable as it could have been if I had kept my old mindset, was making a difference in people's lives, both employees and customers. And me? I felt at peace. It was not a passive or complacent peace, but an active peace full of purpose and meaning. Each day brought new challenges, new opportunities for growth and learning, and I faced them not with fear or anxiety, but with a sense of gratitude and wonder for the incredible journey that is life. Looking back on that fateful day on the Isle of Palms beach, I can't help but marvel at the journey that followed. What began as a near-fatal tragedy turned into the greatest gift I could have received, the chance to rediscover the true meaning of life and love. As time passed and I had the opportunity to reflect more deeply on my near-death experience and the changes it brought to my life, I realized that I had learned valuable lessons that continued to shape my existence day after day. One of the most important lessons was about the nature of love. Before my experience, I thought I loved my family, but what I experienced during my encounter with Jesus showed me that what I called love was actually just a shadow of true, unconditional love. I learned that truly loving means accepting people as they are, without trying to change them or mold them according to our expectations. It means being present, really present, in good times and bad. Another crucial lesson was about the meaning of success. For so long, I had measured success in terms of material accomplishments, money in the bank, the size of my company, the car I drove. But my experience has shown me that true success has nothing to do with these things. True success is in the lives we touch, the differences we make, the love we share. I learned that a life well lived is not measured by the goods we accumulate, but by the good we do. The importance of forgiveness was another powerful lesson. During my experience, I felt complete and unconditional forgiveness for all my mistakes and failures. It taught me to be more forgiving of others and myself. I realized that holding grudges and resentment only hurts us and prevents us from living fully. Forgiving does not mean forgetting or allowing people to hurt us repeatedly, but rather freeing ourselves from the weight of hate and bitterness. I also learned about the interconnection of all things. During my experience, I felt a deep oneness with everything and everyone. This led me to greater environmental awareness and a sense of global responsibility. I began to see how my actions, no matter how small, had an impact on the world around me. This inspired me to live more consciously and sustainably. The lesson about the importance of the gift was particularly transformative. Before, I was constantly living in the future, always planning, always worrying about what would come next. My experience taught me the value of living in the now. I learned to appreciate every moment, every breath, every interaction. This doesn't mean I've stopped planning or worrying about the future, but I've learned to balance that with a deep appreciation for the present. Another crucial lesson was about the nature of reality. My experience has shown me that there is more to existence than what we can see or touch. I learned to be open to mystery, to accept that there are things that are beyond our current understanding. This led me to a more humble and curious approach to life, always seeking to learn and grow. The importance of gratitude was another lesson that transformed my daily life. I began to see each day, each experience, each relationship as a gift. Even in difficulties and challenges, I learned to find something to be grateful for. This attitude of gratitude brought a joy and peace to my life that I had never experienced before. I also learned about the importance of following my intuition and my heart. Before, I made decisions based mostly on logic and what seemed most practical or profitable. My experience taught me to trust my feelings and instincts more, to listen to that inner voice that we often neglect. Ultimately, I learned about the importance of sharing our story and our truth. Initially, I was hesitant to talk about my experience, fearing what others might think. But I realized that by sharing my story, I was not only better processing my own experience, but also opening space for others to reflect on their own lives and beliefs. These lessons were not learned all at once, and I continue to deepen my understanding of them every day. There are times when I fail, times when I catch myself falling into old patterns of thinking or behavior. But the difference now is that I have a clearer internal compass, a deeper sense of purpose and direction. My near-death experience was not the end of my journey, but rather the beginning of a new phase of my life. A time full of discovery, growth, and a deeper appreciation for the wonder of being alive. Every day is an opportunity to apply these lessons, to grow a little more, to love a little more deeply, to live a little more fully. And while I don't wish a near-death experience on anyone, I am deeply grateful for mine. It was the awakening I needed, the catalyst for a richer, more meaningful life more aligned with what really matters. Now, nearly a decade after my near-death experience, I look back and see how that singular event transformed not only my life, but also the lives of those around me. The impact of that experience continues to expand in ever-widening circles, like ripples on a lake. My family, who were the first to feel the changes in me, flourished in ways I could never have imagined. Julianne and I recently celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary, and our relationship is stronger and deeper than ever. We become true life partners, supporting each other on our individual and shared journeys. Mason and Elena, now young adults, have grown to become compassionate and conscientious individuals. They have chosen careers that allow them to make a difference in the world, Mason as a teacher at a public school in a low-income neighborhood, and Elena as an environmental lawyer. Seeing them living lives of purpose and meaning fills me with a joy that words cannot describe. My company has also undergone a remarkable transformation. What was once just a profit-focused business has become a force for good in our community. We implement sustainability policies, create mentoring programs for young entrepreneurs, and establish a foundation that supports various social causes. Seeing my employees embrace this new vision and contribute their own ideas to make the world a better place is incredibly rewarding. But perhaps the most surprising aspect of the ongoing legacy of my experience is how it has touched the lives of people I have never met in person. Over the years, I have received countless letters, emails, and messages from people who have heard my story and been impacted by it. Some have told me how my experience has inspired them to reevaluate their own lives and make significant changes. Others shared their own near-death experiences, finding comfort and validation in my story. I have been invited to speak at numerous events, from small support groups to large conferences. Every time I share my story, I am humbled by people's response. I see tears in strangers' eyes, I hear sighs of recognition. I feel the energy in the room shift as people begin to consider their own lives in a new light. However, with this increased attention also came a sense of responsibility. I realized that my story had the power to influence people in profound ways, and that made me be very careful about the words I use and the messages I convey. I always emphasize that my experience is my own, and that each person needs to find their own path to a more meaningful life. One of the most rewarding things was seeing how my story helped open a broader dialogue about life, death, and what comes after. In a society that often avoids talking about death, my experience served as a starting point for important and necessary conversations. I've seen families begin to discuss their end-of-life wishes. I've seen people facing terminal illnesses find comfort and peace. I've seen skeptics open up to the possibility that there is more to existence than what we can see or touch. At the same time, I remained steadfast in my conviction that the most important thing is not what happens after death, but how we live our lives here and now. My experience has taught me that every moment is precious, that every interaction is an opportunity to spread love and compassion. Over the years, I noticed a subtle but significant change in how people responded to my story. At first, many were fascinated by the details of my near-death experience, the light, the tunnel, the encounter with Jesus. But over time, I noticed that people were increasingly interested in the changes I made in my life after the experience. They wanted to know how they could live more meaningful lives, how they could cultivate deeper relationships, how they could make a difference in the world. This led me to an important realization. The true value of my experience was not in the event itself, extraordinary as it was. The true value was in the lessons I learned and how I applied those lessons to my everyday life. I realized that we don't need a near-death experience to live a fuller, more meaningful life. We all have the ability to make positive changes in our lives, to love more deeply, to live with more purpose. As I approach 60, I feel a deep gratitude for everything I have experienced. The near-death experience I had almost a decade ago continues to shape my life in ways I never could have predicted. She gave me a second chance not just to live, but to live well, to live with purpose and meaning. I look to the future with hope and expectation. I know I still have a lot to learn, a lot to experience. The vision I saw during my experience of myself as a happy grandfather, surrounded by grandchildren, is yet to come. I can't wait to see how this new phase of life unfolds. At the same time, I am at peace with the idea of death. Not that I'm eager to die, there's still so much to live for, but I'm not afraid of death anymore. I know that when my time comes, I will be ready for the next big adventure. In the meantime, I continue to live each day with the heightened awareness I gained through my experience. I continue to strive to be a better husband, a better father, a better friend, a better human being. I continue to look for ways to make a difference, to spread love and compassion, to leave the world a little better than I found it. And for those reading my story, my message is simple. You don't need to have a near-death experience to live an extraordinary life. Each day is an opportunity for a new beginning, to make choices that align your life with your deepest values. It's never too late to change, to grow, to love more deeply. Life is a precious gift. Live it fully. Love unconditionally. Forgive freely. Seek what really matters. Make a difference, no matter how small it may seem. And always remember, in the end, it is love that remains. It's love that matters. This is the most important lesson I've learned on my journey, and it's the legacy I hope to leave behind. A life lived with love is a life well lived. And this, more than anything else, is what makes our existence truly meaningful.